When you first lay eyes on the Dodge Deora, it doesn't just look unusual, it feels like it came from a completely different version of the 1960s, a version where surf culture, space-age optimism, and bold engineering ideas all collided in the best possible way. This isn't just a custom pickup, it's a rolling experiment in design, creativity, and a little bit of what happens if we ignore all the usual rules. The Deora was created in the mid-1960s by the legendary Alexander brothers, Mike and Larry, two names that carry serious weight in the world of custom cars. They worked together with designer Harry Bentley Bradley, who had a background in industrial design and a clear vision of what a futuristic vehicle should look like. The base for the project was a Dodge A100, but by the time they were finished, almost nothing about the original truck remained recognizable. From the outside, the Deora looks incredibly clean and smooth, almost like it was sculpted rather than built. The body was heavily modified, lowered, and reshaped to remove anything unnecessary. Door handles? Gone. Sharp edges? Not needed. Even the proportions were altered to give it a long, flowing silhouette that looks more like a concept car than a working vehicle. And that gold paint finish wasn't chosen by accident. It gave the truck a kind of futuristic glow, especially under show lights. It's the kind of color that quietly says, yes, I know I look cool. But the real magic of the Deora isn't just how it looks, it's how it works.
Let's start with the engine. Underneath that smooth body sits a 170 cubic inch Chrysler Slant 6 inline six-cylinder engine, producing roughly 100 to 115 horsepower. Not exactly a powerhouse by modern standards, but reliable, simple, and perfectly adequate for a show car that was never meant to dominate drag strips. The engine was repositioned during the build to better suit the radical layout, which allowed the designers to completely rethink the front of the vehicle. And that brings us to one of the most iconic features of the Deora, the way you actually get inside it. Because there are no conventional doors. Instead, the entire front section of the vehicle opens. The windshield lifts upward and a lower panel folds down, creating an entry point from the front. You don't step in from the side like in a normal vehicle, you climb in like you're boarding a futuristic pod. It's one of those ideas that feels incredibly cool until you imagine trying to explain it to someone seeing it for the first time. Where's the door? There isn't one. What do you mean there isn't one? And just when you think it can't get more unusual, the steering system adds another layer of creativity. The Deora uses a pivoting steering mechanism with a yoke-style steering wheel. When entering the vehicle, the steering assembly swings out of the way, making space to climb in. Once seated, you pull it back into position and lock it in place. It's a clever solution that feels more like something from an aircraft cockpit than a road vehicle. As for how the Deora actually turns, despite all the futuristic design choices, the steering itself remains mechanically grounded. The front wheels handle direction changes through a modified but fundamentally conventional system, adapted to work with the unique cabin layout. So while it looks like something that should hover, it still turns in a way that engineers of the time would understand, just with a bit more flair.
Underneath, the suspension setup stayed relatively traditional, using solid axles and leaf springs. This might sound a bit old school compared to the radical exterior, but it was a smart choice. When you're experimenting with bold design, sometimes it's good to keep the mechanical foundation reliable. Think of it as wearing comfortable shoes while doing something completely ridiculous. It keeps things manageable. The Deora made its big debut at the Detroit Autorama in 1967, and it didn't just blend in with the crowd, it completely stole the spotlight. The truck won the prestigious Riddler Award, one of the highest honors in the custom car world. And once it won, there was no going back. The Deora instantly became a legend. Part of its success came from perfect timing. The 1960s were a period of bold experimentation in design. People were fascinated by the future, by space travel, by new shapes and ideas. The Deora fit perfectly into that cultural moment. It looked like something that belonged on a California beach parked next to a surfboard, with the ocean in the background and a soundtrack playing somewhere in the distance. And speaking of cultural impact, the Deora didn't just stay in car shows. It became one of the original models in the Hot Wheels lineup when the brand launched in 1968. That means millions of people around the world first experienced this car not in real life, but as a small die-cast toy racing across floors and tracks. For many, the Deora wasn't just a car, it was part of childhood. And honestly, that makes perfect sense. The design has that toy-like quality, not in a bad way, but in a way that sparks imagination. It looks like something you'd draw as a kid when no one tells you what a car is supposed to look like.
Despite all its success and popularity, the Deora remained a one-off creation. It was never intended for mass production, and realistically, it probably wouldn't have worked as a practical everyday vehicle. Getting in through the front might be fun the first few times, but in the rain or in a tight parking space, maybe not so much. Still, practicality was never the point. The Deora was about pushing boundaries. It was about showing what could be done when designers and builders are given complete creative freedom, and in that sense, it succeeded perfectly. Today, the Deora is remembered as one of the most iconic custom vehicles ever built. It continues to inspire designers, collectors, and car enthusiasts around the world. And even now, decades later, it still manages to look futuristic, which is probably the highest compliment you can give to a car from the 1960s. Because, let's be honest, most vehicles from that era look like they belong to the past. The Deora looks like it skipped the past entirely and went straight for the future. And if you ever had the chance to see it in person, you'd probably do exactly what people did back in 1967. Stop, stare, and try to figure out how something so unusual actually works. And then smile when you realize that it doesn't need to make perfect sense to be absolutely brilliant. If you enjoy discovering rare, unusual, and creative vehicles like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are many more incredible automotive stories ahead, and some of them are even wilder than this one.